Hello, this is Lex, and welcome to the Nextep Remote Podcast, where I have the pleasure to interview some of the best remote work experts from all over the world. In each episode, we cover a topic, success story, or challenge to help you make remote work work. Enjoy! Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. In this episode, I'll be talking about the dark side of remote working, and I'll be doing that with Matteo Grassi, who has enormous amount of knowledge and experience in helping companies worldwide scale and increase their revenue. And he's proven time and time again that even the most traditional of organizations and departments can not only run but thrive remotely. So he is very well positioned to talk about the negative consequences, potential negative consequences of remote working, things that don't work or could be done better. He is also, of course, one of the founders of the Nextep group that this podcast is part of. We've had, it's taken us a while to get this together because we both have busy schedules, but we're finally here. Matteo, welcome. And straight away, first question for you, where are you in the world?
I am in Ireland at the moment. Originally, I'm Italian. I left Italy when I was 20 years old, so there is very little Italian left in me. I'm here in Ireland. My daughter is here, so I kind of use it as a base. I travel more though than I should. The last obviously 6 months I didn't do that much, and yeah, so that's it. Yeah, it's basically I'm based here in the west of Ireland, to be precise, in Galway.
Very nice, very nice. And obviously, you probably haven't done as much traveling as you would have liked in the last 6 months. So, what else have you been up to in the past 3 or 6 months? What's been going on in your world?
Just work really. I think we all have been in the same situation, and most people that I spoke to that had a remote life or they were working remotely, they complained about the fact that we're just working all the time. And when you actually chatting to people that lost their jobs, which was very sad, and lots of my friends did, um, they realized that people that were in a working remote, they actually were working more than they should. And just because you're here, you can't go out, you don't travel. So obviously, when you travel, when you go out, your work schedule is it's let's say it's more normal. Even my work schedule, I work less because you're busy with other things. But if you're here, you're stuck at home, you just work all the time. So
Absolutely, it's so difficult to set those boundaries, isn't it? That we have this. If you work in an office, you start and you finish roughly at the same time. Yeah, we overwork, we do more, but the day is more interrupted. Whereas I very often catch myself that I sit at the desk and I've realised I've been working at something on something for the last 40 minutes and I haven't moved. Whereas if I was in the office, I probably would have gone out of my desk to speak to somebody at least once or twice in that time. So it is very, very difficult, and I guess that is one of the underestimated parts and the darker side of remote working. But there are elements of negatives from an employee point of view, I guess, which I'm sure we'll get into. But let's dive into the aspect of the possible negative consequences of remote working from an organization point of view. First of all, can any company, no matter the industry, go remote, in your opinion? What's your view on that?
I think, yeah, every company, besides companies that have I think every company can go remote. Obviously, not 100% remote. If you have a company that we make a product, obviously the people needs to go in the factory and actually create the product with their hands. But the accounting team can be remote, the marketing team can be remote. So I truly believe that every company can go remote, at least partially. And I think with the COVID crisis, I think whatever doubts we had, we were forced into doing this. Um, there is a difference as well. I think the topic that I said before of like not being able to travel and stuff. I think there is a big difference of working remotely from home and digital nomads, and and I do feel that a lot of companies don't manage this right. And I come from before I started working for myself. I used to work for Shopify, which has a huge remote workforce. Now they actually announced that they're going to go fully remote. But when I was over here, when I was over working for them in Ireland, we were all remote. But the head office in Ottawa and Waterloo, etc., in Canada, they were actually physical offices. And one policy that was implemented in Shopify is that even though you are a remote employee, you cannot leave the country that you're in. So you cannot travel pretty much. You have to be resident in your house, you have to give your address. So it's like a remote position, but really you're just working from home. And I know that a lot of people left and a lot of people were not happy about this because this policy was changed and it wasn't there at the beginning. I don't know what I'm going to do now, but this is another dark side kind of the remote work. It's like we're giving the people the opportunity to have the freedom. And I think freedom is the bargaining chip that will let you have actually, will let you attract talent. And when I do hiring for companies, because I actually do that as well, I do talent acquisition, I'm able actually to attract top talent for much less money than they are getting at the moment. I'm not saying that we're underpaying people. It's just like if you are a startup and you want to have like a CTO or I don't know, a head of marketing, and you want to pick it from a A-list company, you're probably looking at 100, 150K a year, right? And you don't have that kind of money. But when I approached them, I was like, look, we have this money. And was like, yeah, it's fine. And it's fine for me as long as I'm remote because I want to move to Germany. I want to move to whatever, or I'm in a long distance relationship and I'm willing to give up half of my salary because I have the freedom to move. So from my experience, the freedom to move and the flexibility is the biggest bargaining chip and the biggest upside of being in a remote position. But I know a lot of companies, they cannot do that. So where is the line where the upside of remote work and the downside of remote work, they find the balance? So that's, I think, what the topic maybe of today is going to be.
Absolutely. Well, it was the first episode of this podcast when I spoke to Jelaine Chan, and we actually tackled the difference between remote and working from home, because that's one of the things that are really confused, I think. Based on what you just said, that organizations the size of Shopify or any organization, you can work remotely, but you can't leave the country. Well, then I'd argue that's not remote. You're just swapping one desk for another, and you have to be independent. Yes, it gives you a bit more freedom to manage your time, which is obviously a benefit and might be what most people actually want, because it will be interesting to see what happens once all the restrictions are lifted and people are encouraged to start going back to the offices. Who will want to go back and why? Why would they prefer to stay? That would be my question, I guess. But that's a conversation for a completely different podcast. I would think we might have to tackle that differentiation yet again in the future once we know a lot more, once we've learned from everything that's happened in the last few months. So absolutely, what do you think are potential dangers from a company point of view of going remote? So you mentioned a people's point of view, or the impact on companies' people, that it might give them the wrong impression that technically, yes, you are allowed to work remotely, but you're not 100%. So that's kind of that transparency has to be made clear so people know what they expect, because a lot of people might be wanting to get into that to get absolute 100% freedom of moving around. From what are some other potential dangers and consequences from a company point of view, you think?
I think the attachment that you can have with your employees, and I see that a lot, especially in startups. And startup is it's a big chunk of remote companies at the moment because of the cost, right? It's like you can actually start a startup, and by being remote, you avoid a lot of roadblocks that any normal company would have. And roadblocks can be like contracts as well, hiring top talent that's going to cost you a bomb, getting the premise right, and with the premise it's all the permits and the insurance, etc., etc., etc. So there is a long list. But the fact is, companies that start remote, it's they just focus on getting everything done and bringing the result and bringing the goal, and it's normal that the relationship between people and loneliness and all these things that come into play with just not being close to people, they start to taking a toll after between 3 to 6 months, in my experience. So you enter in companies, and it happened to me as well, that they start a remote and be successful, and you realize that there's nothing implemented. It's just like there is Slack channels and there is project management tool, and that's it. It's just like there's a bunch of people that sit there, get the work done, and you have meetings and you talk about things, and that's it. But there's nothing. There's nothing else. There's no monitoring of how things are doing. There's no contracts in place. There's no I don't know. There's no culture. Written documentation about culture. There is a forecast on meetings, like real life meetings that we need to have every year, and what we're going to do in those meetings, etc. So I see that a lot, like a lot, and I don't think people do it because they want to. They're not interested. I think people do it because they just don't know. They just don't. They just don't know what to do. They just like I started a more company where a bunch of guys, and now we start hiring people, and we give tasks and people execute the task. Money comes in, and we are in profit, and everything is fine. It's metrics, right? It's we live in a world where the metrics are dictated by how much revenue we do, how much profits we do, and how much money we make, and what is the growth of the company. These are the metrics that everyone looks at, and these to me are metrics that are very important because without them the company wouldn't survive and no one would have a job. But there is other metrics that come into play that are important to making sure that the company is gonna thrive and the company is gonna live.
You're spot on there. I think a lot of organizations do start small and build from there without overcomplicating things. And I think that's very important because a lot of the time we delay things, we stall things because we focus on the minute detail before it's actually important. I think what should happen is that we do continue if we want to start a remote company, get a few people on board together who think the same way, have got similar values and want to work on something. And then as you grow, make a note, make a point out of it as at a certain moment in time, you will actually look at the fundamentals that you mentioned, the contract, the rituals, the meetings, the culture, and everything else. Because without that, your growth will be very, very, very much more difficult going into the future. So that's one part of it. The second part of it, I think, is we a lot of time take things like that for granted. And yes, growth, money, profit, revenue is very important because that's what fuels any organization. That's what helps us grow and develop as a business. But without all the other elements that we just mentioned, it's not going to happen, is it?
The traditional model is great for many reasons. The traditional model of work, like I go to the office, I work 9 to 5, I have a contract where I'm paid a certain amount of money, and then I have a pension, and it's very hard to lose my job because I have all legal rights for my contract in the country that I live, etc., etc. That gives us security. The routine is making sure that our life is separated from the work life, and at the same time we feel kind of comforted in this kind of bubble, right, that we're living in. Maybe we don't have freedom, our freedom is maybe more limited, but I do feel that sometimes limiting freedom is good because we put boundaries, right? So the downside of remote work is we don't have this in many cases. So most people that working remotely, they don't have a contract in place, or they have a contract in place that is somehow kind of a freelance contract or a permanent contract, and not just because the employee doesn't want to employ people, it's just because it's very hard to employ a workforce around the world and set up a legal entity in every country that you start to hire people, right? There is companies like Deal, DEEL, that they're tackling this problem, and I'm very happy that there is companies that are helping other companies to pay people, right, and hire a freelancer remotely around the world and doing the compliance and legal, right? And I think it's not just important for the people that work. I think for the company. I think it's just important also for the people, because even though in your life it doesn't really make a difference having a legal contract towards like a contract that doesn't have much of a legal value in the country that you live in, it mentally makes a difference, and it gives you security, right? Even if it's like a fictitious for security, and at the end of the day a company can let you go and the chances of you to pursuing this legally against them and win it is very, very small. But I think mentally it's important, and it's security feeling that you have. And as humans, we need that, right? We need that.
We do. I've been at a receiving end of redundancy in the past. I've gone through that, and it does give you, I don't want to say a false sense of security. It gives you a sense of security from what you're saying, that you've got a contract, you've got a place, and this and that. But the reality is, it's very, very easy for that to stop, for that to change. And I would actually argue, having been at both ends of that situation, that being remote worker or freelancer or consultant or running my own business, that the sense of security is it might be different, but the how easy that security can be broken is very, very similar. And I've literally this morning have been talking to Angelina Ebeling from ACE, and we touched upon differences in the German employment law and the UK employment law, and they're fundamentally different. It's by comparison, getting rid of somebody, laying somebody off, or making somebody redundant in the UK is far easier than it is than it is in Germany, and things like that just puts another element to how secure actually our jobs can be. Um, you touched upon I was hoping to talk about organizations, but it's very difficult to separate the two. And you touched about the impact on people and culture, and what impact does that have, how an organization operates. And we very often on this podcast do come back to the topic of culture. What do you think organizations, I guess, do wrong, and maybe what they could do better from a point of view? So if we look at the darker side of remote working, if they set it up incorrectly, or if they had the good intentions but they didn't carry it outright, what do you think can they do about culture or anything else that you can think of?
Well, culture, I think what I see most organizations do is not writing the culture book as the first thing that you should write. They start hiring people, you grow, you hire maybe the policies if you're good and you're lucky, to actually have someone that tell you, oh, you should write policies and you should actually start writing guides, etc. But culture book is like some companies that I've been to, they didn't write it, at all. It's not there, and I think that should be the first thing you write. The founder should write the culture book, I think. The founder or founders, understanding what is the company that you want. What this is all about. Why we're all here. What is the purpose of this? And I think it's important to write this because as humans, we need to believe in something more than just making money, and we need to believe in something more than just going to work every day and doing your task. We need to believe in something more abstract, right? And something that we cannot touch. And that's why religion it's so big. I'm not a religious person, but the religion comes from humans needing to believe into something more of just the everyday life. And I think in a way, the culture is similar. Right? Culture is believing that the mission of the company is not just making money, but there is something more to it, right? Shopify had making commerce better for everyone, and the culture was very, very important in the company. There was a great length to they went to great lengths into making sure that the people that were joining the company were part of this culture, by also interviewing people at the beginning, where the first interview has nothing to do with the skills that you have, but just the person that you are, right? So it's just like what kind of person you are, because they wanted to make sure that culturally you were a good fit in the company. And that cultures officer, there was a whole department just dedicated on this. And I see that people will work for you with their heart instead of just with their brain if you do this. Back into remote work, because obviously culture is a topic that we can talk about it in a remote company or a non-remote company. Talking about remote work, it's much harder to just transfer the culture of a company in a remote environment, because when I started, and I give you Shopify as a reason because it's like I think they did it right in many ways. When I started with them, I started remote because I was in Ireland, and there was a lot of transfer of knowledge of the culture of the company. But until I went to Ottawa and visited the office and went into actually in a meeting, I didn't actually realize how important and strong was the culture in the company was. I had to go there. I had to kind of see the office, and I was like, wow, that's what it's all about. Because it's something that people, it's very emotional, the attachment that you have with the culture of the company, and it's very hard to do it remotely. So there is a lot of things that people can do remotely, but it's just harder. So you need to go into great lengths. You have to make sure as well that you dedicate time to making sure that the people that are working for you are understanding the culture of the company, and the culture of the company is transferred through all the departments. So that's my take on that.
I purposely paused there for a few seconds just to kind of take it in. It's a topic that I'm fascinated by, and it's an area that I work with my clients with through Human PM, and I get approached by a number of different people, different organizations, and I could sort of put the organizations into three categories. One of them are people who have identified the change and want to change it and want to put in the work and see it as a long-term process. They recognize that it's not something that happens overnight. Others in a similar boat, and they recognize the long-term process, but they can do it themselves with a bit of help on the side, especially at the start. And the third type of companies who expect a magic pill. They want a workshop at the start, kickoff meeting for, I don't know, a day or 2 days a week, and they think that from there it's going to work. Culture is going to be fantastic now, and the reality is it's not. It's something you start, and then something that you continually keep working on, and you have to put in the effort day in, day out. It comes from all angles, from the top management, from the bottom, from the middle, everywhere. Be it's as you said, it's very transferable. It's not remote work or traditional companies. It's for all companies. With remote companies, I think it's a tiny bit more, not tiny. I think it's a bit more difficult, simply because no one, as you said, no one is in the same vicinity. It's difficult to relate, and it's difficult to connect and build that trust. So it requires a lot more effort, no doubt. It's a fascinating topic. It would be great to explore that further with you. I'm mindful of time on that we've got available with you. One final question I would like to ask you is, what do you think is the future post COVID? Because we are getting to that stage where I'm not exactly sure when this episode's going to air. Most likely somewhere kind of end of June, start of July. But either way, we will already know a lot more of how restrictions are going to be lifted, what companies are facing, what challenges, and so on. What do you reckon, from your point of view, from on remote and non-remote? What's the future looking like?
I big pause. There is a lot of things coming into play now, especially what happens in the US in the last I don't know, couple of weeks.
You're talking about protests from George Floyd.
Yeah, I think the protest, but protest is it's I don't know, it's a detail, right? The thing is like the people, the need of people coming together, and it was like I think that people need people, and that's we need to be social again. In terms of remote work, let's start with that. In terms of remote work, we're going to see more companies going remote. Also, from now until the vaccines will arrive. So I think it's going to be a year before we're out of this. Second wave might coming. If it's not coming, people are going to be prepared for that. Being prepared for that, meaning that a lot of companies will not just go back to the office if they don't need to, because they just want to. That's what I would do if I have, I was like, I want to see it through now. I want to at least making sure that we're not going to hit another second wave and then coming back. A lot of companies cannot go back, most of my friends that are working in the hospitality business, for instance, they cannot open in Ireland just because the restrictions are too much. It's like, we need to maintain 2 meter distance. My premise doesn't allow 2 meter distance. My friends have offices, too costly. They need to implement a new structure and all this kind of thing. So it's going to be very, very hard to go back to a non-remote environment. I think it was easy to close the country. It's much harder to reopen the country, and we're going to see this as the country starts to reopen. So we're going to see an increase on remote work. We're going to see an increase on mental health issues. We're already seeing that. Prozac and Zoloft are capping up their production. So there's been a consumption of antidepressants like on the rise. So we're going to see a lot of things that are related to mental health, from just like social isolation to fear to stress to remote work not done right, etc., etc. We're going to see an economic crisis as well coming up. These are all kind of negative things. It sounds like apocalypse now, but I think we have to be realistic of these things might happen, and it's just and I'm not me saying it. Economists are saying and scientists are saying, right? So I'm listening to people that look at data, right? So if we want to be data driven, it's more than likely that it's going to happen. So what we need to do, I think we need to be able to make sure that the companies that are going remote have the tools to manage their workforce in the right way. So mental health is not going to be too much affected by this. That's the thing that it worried me the most about mental health in general and the repercussion that we're going to see in isolation. Um, I was much happier when I wasn't working remote. Like I know that. Like I am. It's taking me a lot of time, and I still haven't mastered it. The being able to take in the good things of remote work and minimize the negative things of remote work. But now, if I have to put it on a balance, no, I think I was happier when I wasn't remote. The only difference is like I like my life remote, and I think this is the right way, but I struggle way more than when I wasn't. I think the happier than I was in my life is when I was working for a company, and I had like my 9 to 5, and wasn't like happy. I wouldn't say that I was happy, but I was my mental health was much better because I had a structure and I wasn't working 12 hours a day, or I wasn't like, just was much easier to manage. Obviously, when I'm gonna be able to master this, and I will, I will just benefit way more. So it's kind of an investment in the future, the way I see it right now. And I think companies need to make sure that that's the same way that I'm feeling. The company should also implement this, which is it's an investment in the future. Even if you're thinking that things are not working right now, even if you're thinking that your employees are struggling, your employees are struggling maybe with remote work, you know that it's a path that will lead you to a better future when you're going to be able to master a remote workforce and a remote company. But I think we need to acknowledge this, and I feel a little bit like when I speak to consultants, when I speak to people that advocate for remote work, I do feel that we don't have to deny that we can't advocate for something that it's so good for many things, but it's so bad for other things. So it's like we have to be very, very careful, because it's not like the negative and the positive, to me, they equal when you go remote. It's not, to me, it's not like you have more positive and you have more negative. It's the equal. If you look at the numbers, yes, of course, I can tell you that if I have to, let's say, cut myself off of the humans and the mental health and isolation and all of this, I would tell you go remote, no worries, because your cost is gonna go down. It's better for the environment. It's better for people are gonna have more flexibility. You're gonna be able to scale your company much quicker, because that's actually also what I do. I scale companies, and I'm able to scale companies because they're remote. So it's all the positive things. when I start to think about everything else, then there is a bigger topic that in the moment everything is fine, but I'm worried now more than ever of what's going to be in 3 years or 2 years. And I think the COVID crisis opens up, yes, the remote work possibility for every company, but it's open up as well now, and we're going to see that now, the effect on social isolation. And we're going to see now what all of this that we lived through in the last 3 months, what did it cause? And social isolation and remote work is two topics that they go very much well together. So let's learn from data. Let's learn from humans right now that are trying to go back to work. Let's learn what were the consequences of putting a world on lockdown for 3 months and isolating people, because those consequences will give us a hint of what could happen if you actually put a remote company together without proper planning.
And you know what? I think that's a fantastic place to stop. And the reason I say that, because you actually gave me a very, very nice idea to do a mini series of episodes for this podcast, focusing on just aspects of mental health and everything that you basically just beautifully mentioned for us here. So for everybody listening, look out for that. It's coming. I'm working at this moment in time on we've done a mini HR series, and I think this is another one that would be very, very good, because you are absolutely right. This will give us a insight. The last 3 or 4 months will give us insight into the future, how we should do things better. And mental health in general is a topic that is still taboo. Unfortunately, we're getting much better at it, but it's still a difficult topic and something that's often maybe not ignored, but not recognized as very important, be it remote or non-remote. But in remote settings, self-isolation and things like that, definitely something that we need to address. Matteo, final question. How can people find you? Where they can find you, apart from, I'm guessing, LinkedIn, if they want to say thank you, Matteo, for brilliant insight today, or they have any future questions or just want to, buy you a virtual coffee?
I think LinkedIn it's actually the best place, because I'm not much on Facebook. So I think LinkedIn is the easiest place, and I check my messages quite often there as well. I think LinkedIn. Or the remote community, Nextep group. If you Nextep.group, you can join. You can find me there, and you can find also some of my colleagues there, and you can find over 150 people that are experts in the fields. And I think actually we have a mental health channel in there, which is monitored by Christina, which is a mental health practitioner, and she was in the episodes. I think before me, right? Last week.
She was, yeah. She was the third episode.
The third episode, yeah. So yeah.
Brilliant. I'll include links to obviously the Nextep group. They're always in the show notes. I'll drop a link to your LinkedIn page as well, so people can reach out. And if there are any resources, any links or tools that you think people would benefit from reading, if you could send me those, that would be great, and I'll drop them in the show notes. Well, again, thank you very much. It's been a long time coming. We finally got it, and it was brilliant. We're definitely worth the wait. So thank you very much for taking the time, and I'll talk to you soon. One more thing before you take off. Nextep Group offers premium level support across a diverse range of remote work issues, 24 hours a day and in multiple languages, with experts in HR, legal, operations, tech, leadership, and more. It's open to leaders looking for guidance, consultants, and remote workers wanting to share their experience. You can join by visiting www.nextstep.group. This podcast is produced and hosted by Lech Guzowski from Human PM. Special thanks to the founders of the Nextep Group, Christina Barger, Jelaine Chan, Stefan Dawn, and Matteo Grassi.